My parents filed a lawsuit over my house. When I asked, my dad said, "It belongs to your sister," but I showed them every deposit and won in court. Indeed, it is my own parents, and indeed it is my own residence as well. I went from holding onto the keys I had been hoarding for half a decade to staring at legal documents that stated my name as if I were a criminal in the blink of an eye. When I asked my father about the motivation for the actions he had taken, he spoke immediately and without any hesitance. He looked me directly in the eyes and said to me, "That house is actually owned by your sister." Initially, I had thought that this section would bring about my ruin, but it did not. Rather, the moment everything collapsed and nothing in my family would ever be the same again, was the point in time that followed this. The majority of my life has been spent with the conviction that the most uncomplicated approach to preserving harmony within my family was to be quiet, put in a significant amount of effort, and never request anything more than what I had earned for myself. I would want to introduce myself. My name is Olivia. I gained an understanding of how to manage the intricacies of my parents' expectations as a result of growing up in a family in which my father, Robert, made every decision sound like a decree, and my mother, Charlotte, made those decrees feel shameful. Isabella, who is my younger sister, has never felt any of those emotions in her entire life. She was able to glide through life with their acceptance, attention, and steadfast belief as her safety net because they always had the sense that she needed more support than I did. I reached the conclusion when I was still very young that fairness was not a principle that was upheld in our household. Expectations had a role in this. I did, however, try my best to do so. My occupation was the main thing on my mind. I would spend the long evenings working on my laptop, with my hair pulled back and my eyes watering. I would constantly reminding myself that if I were more disciplined, I would be able to have more freedom, a freedom that I never had while I was growing up. I put away a certain amount of money for a duration of 5 years. There will be no unplanned shopping sprees or trips. Lunches that are prepared at home and then taken to school. All of the bonuses were instantly sent to the savings account. I was able to get myself one step closer to the realization of my goal, which was to achieve something that was rightly mine, with every single promotion I received. Either a home or an apartment. The location in which I reside. The night that I delivered the news to my family that I had finally managed to save up enough money to make a down payment. Charlotte reacted with such enthusiasm that she clapped her hands. It was as if she had been waiting her entire life for the opportunity to hear that particular piece of news. "Oh, sweetheart, we're so proud of you," she said as she decorated the dining table with lights, treating the event as though it were Thanksgiving. Robert responded with an affirmative nod of his head. In response to the statement, "Smart investment if you do it right," I experienced a fleeting, weak sense of pride. Must be nice having that engineering salary. Some of us are still paying off grad school, Isabella commented with a tone that was not joking as she sat back in her chair and stirred her iced tea. There was no particular moment in time when this occurred. I tried to force a smile onto my face. Following the remark, "You're doing well at your firm. You'll get there." She stayed mute. She did not have any obligation to respond. When my accomplishments attracted the attention she thought she deserved, the atmosphere surrounding her became oppressive, just as it often did when she sensed the air tightening itself around her feelings of resentment. In spite of all this, I carried on moving ahead. After I finished my work for the day, I would drive around tranquil neighborhoods and look at different houses on the weekends, picturing a life in which nobody possessed the power to rewrite my judgments. I was cognizant of the fact that the apartment, which I eventually came upon on a tranquil street located at the very edge of the city, was not fancy because it was a 3-bedroom home. Despite the fact that it was not without its flaws, it was entirely of my own making. There was a sense of the extraordinary as I put my signature on the papers. This house, which I had earned, would end up being the catalyst that would ignite and consume every single last misconception that I had about what my family was truly like. What I was not aware of was that this house, the one that I had earned, would also serve as the catalyst that would ignite and consume every single last misconception that I had about what my family was truly like. What I was not aware of was that this house, the one that I had earned, would also serve as the catalyst that would ignite and consume every single last misconception that I had about what my family was truly like. The rings on my mobile phone were continuous and had no breaks between them. I was sitting on the floor of the living room that I had just moved into, and I was surrounded by boxes that were barely half unpacked. I had concluded the sale of my property 2 days before to this. For the time being, I have chosen to ignore it. I was still gripping a screwdriver with one of my hands, even though I was experiencing feelings of exhaustion and my body was covered in sweat. Nonetheless, the very second that Sophie's name flashed on the screen alongside the words, "You need to see this right now," there was an abrupt, tightening sensation in my abdomen. She sent her a screenshot by way of email. The author of the social media post was Isabella. Excessive, melodramatic, and suffused with feelings of self-compassion. This post has received over 200 likes from individuals on social media. When your sister uses the money grandma meant for your first home and buys one for herself instead. Comments that are filled to the brim with individuals I do not recognize, who are expressing to me that I am greedy, self-centered, and inauthentic. I could not manage to swallow. I read it again, taking my time this time, in the hopes that I had misread it previously. No, she was fabricating a false charge about me, alleging that I had taken money that, according to what she believed, did not exist. Funds that our family had never previously set aside for her use, and neither had Grandma. I was finally able to get through to Sophie after the phone rung one more time. "Dad, I held off on giving you a response till later." Robert called out, "Hello?" in a voice that was both dull and official in tone. I remained perfectly still as I said, "Even Olivia, we need to talk about the circumstances surrounding the house." "What situation?" The voice of Charlotte rang out, coming from somewhere in the background. "My love, you are aware of the subject matter of this, correct?" "In reply to your question, I must say that I do not know," I said. Robert exhaled a loud breath, as if my presence were an inconvenience to him, and retorted, "I do not. Your mother and I have spoken with an attorney. The funds designated for Isabella's future home were meant to go to her," he continued. My wrists were trembling with the force of my hammering heart, which was so fierce that it was practically palpable there. "You were aware of that, were you?" "What are you talking about? There was never any designated money. I bought this house with my own savings. I can show every deposit." The conversation proceeds in quiet. After then, Robert gave a line of dialogue that resulted in my vision of reality being split into two separate parts. As soon as I heard the words, "That house belongs to your sister," I sank upon the nearest step. "Dad, this is completely out of the question. There is not a single agreement, not a single fund," I remarked. "No, you're making things unnecessarily complicated," he retorted with frustration. "Your sister needs that house more than you do. She's been planning for it, and now you've taken it out from under her. She never told me she wanted this house." "It doesn't matter," he said with unwavering conviction. "We'll be filing in court tomorrow." Due to the fact that my hand was shaking with such intensity, I was on the edge of letting the phone fall to the ground. Charlotte's voice had a tone of incredulity and disappointment as she posed the question. "Are you seriously going to take this matter to court?" "We only want to do what is right by your sister. She is deserving of this. You can purchase another one in the future." "Another one?" It is as if 5 years of sacrifice could be repeated as easy as picking up a carton of milk. Prior to the completion of the telephone discussion, not a single parting word was spoken. I was overcome with a feeling of betrayal that I had not expected to experience, even in the most horrific of my nightmares, as I sat there in the dimly illuminated hallway of my new house. The fact that my parents were perplexed is not true. Their guess turned out to be accurate. They were in the process of determining which side they would support, and it was not going to be my side. That evening, Sophie made an appearance, bringing with her a supper that she had procured from a restaurant and a look on her face that unmistakably indicated that she was already fully informed of everything that had transpired. "You're not crazy," she said, her voice low and quiet. And Jack made his entrance into the room and then stood just behind her. "They're trying to take your house away," he continued. It was unknown to me that he had also arrived on the scene. He folded his arms on his own. That night, I was unable to fall asleep. I had to inform Olivia that she needed to prepare herself because her family was about to engage in a legal fight, and that they were not bluffing. With a cup of cold tea in my hand, I was seated at the kitchen counter of Sophie's apartment, gazing off into the distance as the place buzzed with activity all around me. The effects of the shock had not yet worn off. It had undergone a transformation into something that was of greater significance, and as a result, my chest was experiencing an unpleasant sensation of constriction. Sophie took the seat that was right across from where I was sitting, and she leaned her elbows up on the counter. "You are not leaving this place," she said in a tone that left no room for dispute. I did not argue with the assertion that followed. "You shouldn't be alone in that house right now." I did not have the ability to do it. With a folder tucked underneath his arm, Jack was spotted returning the following morning. He said, "You're going to need to see a specialist, someone who handles property claims and inheritance disputes." He handed the information over to me while he was speaking. "The best person I know for that is Grace Langston," he said to reporters. I gave him a blink in order to respond. "There is no problem with inheritance," he said with a smile that did not include any humor at all. "Your parents are attempting to bring about an issue concerning inheritance." On the afternoon that followed, Grace arrived to her office to meet up with us. Her office was furnished with glass walls and soft lighting, and everything inside was organized and positioned with the same precision that she herself exhibited. While I provided her with an exhaustive description of all of the events that had transpired, such as Robert's threat and Isabella's post, she sat there in silence. Once I had completed what I had been doing, she took a seat and leaned back. She expressed her opinion. "Their claim sounds fabricated. But weak cases can still create damage if not handled properly. We'll need statements, payment records, anything showing your house was bought strictly from earned income." I made the statement. "The whole thing is in my possession." Grace tapped her pen as she listened to her companion say, "Every transfer, every savings log," and then nodded her head in agreement. "That's good," was her response. After hours of not being able to catch my breath, I eventually succeeded in returning to a consistent rhythm. "At this point we are in need of witness statements. Who was aware that the inheritance was equally divided?" "My Aunt Victoria and my Uncle Thomas," she said with a great deal of excitement. "You must get in touch with them." In response to the second time the phone had rang, Thomas replied, "It is imperative that we obtain their statements as quickly as possible." Following that, I addressed him and said, "Olivia, my darling, I heard that something was happening." He didn't even pause for a moment when I explained the situation to him. In reply he stated, "Your grandmother would be absolutely livid. I'll sign whatever you need." In contrast, the reaction that was exhibited by Aunt Victoria was comparatively restrained, but it was also considerably more significant. She continued by saying, "I was always worried that this might come to pass. Your father, he asked your grandparents to change the will, to give more to Isabella. They refused. He never accepted that." She paused slightly before continuing to speak. "I'll testify if you need me," I responded to you. Little by little, the truth started to take on a shape that I was finally able to discern. This was by no means an event that happened on its own. I was not the center of attention in this particular circumstance. It was the outcome of a series of years in which unstated expectations were nurtured. Years of Isabella being promised things that would never be hers. On the other hand, 2 nights after that event, the most terrible thing happened. While we were making our way to my residence so that Sophie and I could collect the remainder of my possessions, we observed that there was an object on the porch that appeared to be moving. An individual was shaking the door handle. The given name Isabella is a female name that translates to devoted to God. She was attempting to place a key in a lock, and this key was one that I had never given to her before. "What are you doing?" I shouted at you. She took a step back in astonishment and let out a gasp. I thought I could just look around by breaking in. "It's going to be my house anyway," she stated with a sense of frustration. The moment in question was responsible for the transformation of everything. Grace made reference to it as nothing more than an attempted unauthorized entry. Evidence or information in the form of documents or other materials that provide support. And out of nowhere, the fear that I had been wading through transformed into something that was more stable, something that had a bite to it. If they wanted to engage in a legal struggle, then they had the right to do so. A solitary one would be theirs to keep. The smell of a strong disinfectant perfume that reminded one of the smell of aged paper was everywhere in the courtroom. It does not emit any type of comforting sensation. As I was walking along Grace in the corridor, it felt as though the walls were vibrating with each individual pulse of my heart. I was able to clearly sense each one of these beats. I was trembling, and my breathing was uneven and inconsistent. I was no longer afraid by the prospect of losing the house. I was not willing to face the individuals who raised me and acknowledge the fact that they had changed and were no longer the same people I had known in my memory. Robert, Charlotte, and Isabella were already seated on seats at the plaintiff's table when we entered into the room. Robert made an adjustment to the way he was standing the moment his eyes locked with mine, doing so as if he were preparing to fight in a combat. Charlotte looked away. With a mixture of arrogance and an increasing amount of animosity, Isabella gazed at me from my head to my feet. It seems that she was of the opinion that I was responsible for betraying her trust. Grace softly touched my arm with her hand. The moment that Judge Rebecca Lawson entered the chamber, there was an immediate and complete cessation of all sound. She had made the following declaration. Retain your composure. Bear in mind that our purpose here is not to combat emotions. Rather, our goal is to present facts. She possesses a personality that will make you sit up straight in your seat without even thinking about it, displaying an attitude that is both confident and composed, and refusing to entertain any nonsense before it even has the opportunity to arise. She gave the directive, "Let's get started." Philip Carter, who is the lawyer for my parents, was the first person to come up and begin. Your Honor, this case concerns a verbal family agreement regarding inheritance distribution, an agreement that Miss Olivia violated when she purchased a property using funds intended for her sister Isabella. When I heard the phrase, verbal agreement, I felt an uncomfortable sensation in my stomach. He continued on by saying, "We maintain that Isabella was the intended recipient of the house that Miss Olivia purchased, and this is based on the long-standing discussions that have taken place within the family." Grace remained motionless and did not respond in any way to what had just been said. She waited patiently for him to stand up once he had settled into his seat. When he did stand up, she too rose with a sense of assurance, as though she were holding a royal flush. Your Honor, she began with her opening statement. The plaintiffs claim a verbal agreement that has no witnesses, no documentation, and no mention in the legally executed will of the deceased grandparents. Meanwhile, the defendant has provided detailed payment records confirming that every dollar used to purchase her home came from 5 years of earned income. Judge Lawson gave a sign of approval by nodding. It was Philip who made the request for Robert to take his place at the witness stand. He was the very first individual to accomplish such feat. My father rose to his feet, took a big breath, and turned to face the courtroom. He looked like a man who had finally been given the acknowledgement that he had been anticipating all along. My mother has always had the desire to provide assistance to Isabella in the process of obtaining her first home, as evidenced by the statements that he made. I clenched my jaw as I spoke the words. It was understood. Olivia was aware of this fact. Grace placed her hand on my arm, and this helped me to feel more centered. Philip's second witness to take the stand was someone by the name of Charlotte. She was able to get her voice to tremble just the right amount so that it seemed as though she had compassion for the circumstances in which she found herself. We do not have any intention of causing Olivia any sort of distress, she said in a soft voice. She went on to say, what we want is to get the commitment that was given to Isabella. His response was, a promise. Just another word that does not have any sort of vertebral column. Isabella was the next person to be called upon to step up to the front. Following a shaky inhalation, she made an effort to smooth out the creases in her skirt. Show what you are capable of. Exercise caution. For a number of years I have been putting money aside, she replied. Nevertheless, I do not earn as much as Olivia does. I had believed that she was aware that the house was intended for me, Philip said as he placed a comforting hand on her shoulder while she made her way down the stairs. It is a fact that he did that. Grace was the next person to have her turn after that. She stood there with a straight spine and piercing gaze. Your Honor, we would like to call our first witness, Thomas Langston. With a cool and dignified demeanor, Thomas, the uncle, entered the room in a way that was appropriate for a person who did not feel the need to prove anything to anyone. He stood up in the witness box and delivered his testimony in a clear and expressive manner. Philip tried to challenge him, but Thomas refused to adjust his stance on the matter. No special promises, no conditions were present. I was present in the room when it was read. The will was divided evenly. After that, Aunt Victoria showed up. Even though she was moving at a sluggish speed, she gave the impression that she was confident through her voice. She stated to me, Robert requested that our parents change the will in order to provide Isabella with a greater amount. Not a single sound could be heard in the courtroom. It was stated that they refused. They believed in fairness. Charlotte looked down and averted her gaze. Robert's jaw muscles were forcibly contracting. Before I was brought into the stand, Grace spoke to Victoria in a manner that was considerate and appreciative. When I was sitting down, I found the microphone to be too loud and uncomfortably close to me. That being said, speaking honestly was like to breathing oxygen. I have been putting money away for 5 years, I said. Grace handed over a folder that had been neatly organized to the judge and declared, "I am able to provide an explanation for every single cent. Not a single dollar from the inheritance was spent." Judge Lawson stated, "These documents are statements that provide documentation of the following: savings transfers, deposits, payroll, and income for a period of 5 years," as he carefully looked over the pages with his eyes. "I am well aware of that particular situation. Isabella attempted to get entrance to the defendant's property using a key that was not hers. She did this 2 nights before the mediation was scheduled to take place." Grace then proceeded to make the following declaration. "Your Honor, we have one more matter to address." At that very moment, Isabella abruptly lifted her head. Grace completely disregarded her and stated, "I wasn't breaking in. I just wanted to take a look." "A neighbor witnessed the attempt and reported it to the authorities," she added. "Here is the report," she remarked before presenting it to him. "The defendant did not pursue charges, but it demonstrates a belief held by the plaintiffs that they were entitled to the house regardless of legal ownership. Phillips suffered a blunder." "That has nothing whatsoever to do with the matter at hand," Grace said in a calm tone of voice. Judge Lawson raised his hand and remarked, "And the core of this case?" As a result of the intensity of her gaze, the mood in the courtroom grew quiet and subdued. She responded by saying, "I have gone over the material. The will was equal. There was no evidence of any financial arrangement assigning funds specifically to Isabella, and the defendant's purchase was made entirely from her own earnings." She took a pause for a brief period, letting the air become increasingly thick. Isabella's face became as pale as chalk as she heard the comment. "With regard to the attempted entry, that escalation is extremely troubling." After Judge Lawson made the declaration, "I hereby dismiss the case in its entirety," he gave the gavel a forceful bang. When he made this announcement, his voice did not shake or waver. "The plaintiffs are barred from refiling these claims." I had the sensation of a burden that had been sitting on my chest for months suddenly being removed from me. What I was experiencing was not a feeling of relaxation. Rather, it was a sensation of the air being forcefully expelled from my body. Charlotte could not find the words to speak, so she covered her mouth with her palm. There was a trace of something malevolent that could be seen in Robert's eyes. There are a number of different feelings that a person could feel, including anger, perplexity, and wounded pride. Isabella could feel tears beginning to form in her eyes. It was not long after we entered the corridor that Robert started to pursue us. He shot back, "This isn't over. We're still family," he said. I directly confronted him by turning my body to face him for the first time. "You don't go to court to sue your family members over lies. Family members don't try to steal what someone else worked hard for. You made this decision." Her fingers reached out for my hand, and Charlotte grabbed it. I retreated a step. "I do not desire to fight," she whispered. My response was, "You already did." Isabella then let out a little sob and said, "And you lost." "That was supposed to be mine as far as I can tell," I said. I answered in a quiet voice, "That was never the case. Nevertheless, you have never shown any interest in discovering what the truth actually is. All you wanted was to get everything that was promised to you." It was the first time that she seemed to be unsure of herself, almost as if she was defenseless. Grace walked up and took her position next to me. "We have nothing more to do in this place," she announced in a voice that was unperturbed. We were absolutely so, without a doubt. When we left the location, I did not feel a sense of triumph. I had a sense of serenity, fulfillment, and freedom wash over me. Despite the fact that they were not expecting my response, they were somehow able to perceive it. That evening, while I was walking back home, I was able to witness the sun sinking down beneath the rooftops, showering the street in a soft orange glow. This was the first time in months that I had seen the view of my own front door, and I did not immediately feel like my stomach was being wrenched. Once I had opened it, I walked in and let the quietness wrap around me like a comforting blanket. There is no source of worry, no source of anxiety, and there is no individual who is trying to make modifications to something that should be rightly mine. Sophie was the first one to make her entrance. It seemed as if I had just emerged triumphant in a competition, and she was carrying some takeaway with her. She was smiling broadly. "You were able to make that happen," she said after giving me a tight hug. Jack was the one who brought a bottle of sparkling cider. Not many people walk into a courtroom against their entire family and walk out standing taller. Grace continued to be composed, as she always is, even though she came in last place. Nevertheless, her grin was more authentic than any I have ever seen. The reason that Thomas placed a phone call was to convey the fact that both he and Victoria were overflowing with a sense of pride. Although justice does not resolve all issues, it does provide you with the space to catch your breath, she added in a hushed voice. Her words served to remind me that the concept that fairness was important was one that my grandparents had always maintained. I have finally experienced a feeling of connection to that conviction this evening. Not simply because of the fact that we are related by blood, but also because of the fact that we made the decision to be together. I walked leisurely across the living room, touched the smooth surface of the table that I had just polished, and opened the windows so that the fresh air of the night might enter the room. This house did not feel like it was simply a purchase anymore. It felt different now. It was not simply a matter of having an address within the city limits. It appeared as though it was mine once more, completely and without a doubt. I came to a plain and immutable revelation on that particular night when I stood in the threshold of my home. It is not possible to define the concept of family by solely referring to the ideas of blood relations or tradition, and it is also not possible to confine the concept of family to those persons who claim to have knowledge of what would be in your best interest. The fact that there are those who continue to be there for you even when everything collapses is what defines it. I was able to emerge triumphant in more than just a single case. I have taken back control of my life, my home, my limitations, and my ability to communicate. If you have ever found yourself in a position in which you were required to fight for what you are owed or to confront other people who attempted to alter your story, you are not alone.